Hey, good morning everyone, it's Tractor Man 44 again, and the missus and myself are back out at the old home place looking around, and after a little bit of a snow. And what you're looking at right here is years ago, back in the 1950s, and possibly even a little bit before, my grandfather was big into Knights of Columbus, and this used to be a big cedar glen, and there were some massive cedar trees in here, like that, the one that you still see dead center there. And the Knights of Columbus would come out, they would put up these temporary booths, and they would all the local townsfolk and everything would come out and they'd have a Knights of Columbus picnic. There was a big ordeal for the time anyway. But at any rate, of course, this top part, this is all pasture. This was the pasture, or part of the pasture anyway. And of course now they've got, asphalt parking area, for everybody going to the park now, because as I think I told you before, the whole 184 acre place here is turned into a local city park. Now this row of cedar trees along here, that's right at the edge of the old one of our larger hay fields, which is to the left, where you can see all the snow area. And of course the fence row right there is where the birds set. That's why there's so many trees on the fence rows, because the birds set on there and process the seeds and goes right on through, and then of course it all turns into a tree line. Probably be able to see the old barn through the trees and stuff up in the distance. But we're at the end of the lane, what we always call the lane. Of course, you can see the row of cedar down on this side, and then a few cedar on the left. This is where the cattle, as we'd let them out of the barn in the morning, and all the beef cattle and dairy cattle would walk out the lane and go out to pasture in the morning. And of course, one of us have to go out and retrieve them in the evenings if they didn't come into the call. Most of the time, the old man would stand out behind the barn. He'd give his cattle call. And many times they would just wander on in, with the lead cow with the cowbell, just bringing them all back right into the barn. But sometimes the cantankerous old things wouldn't, and we'd have to go out and fetch them. And of course, that was my duty many times, just like my brothers older than myself. There's another shot across the hayfield here. Now there's a second field on the other side of that, and that was where we always had our wheat and our barley and all that stuff, at alternating times. And down below that tree line is our big 40-acre bottom field. It's kind of in a floodplain, so occasionally when the water would get high, we'd get a little water in that area there. But like I say, we're just going right up the lane towards the old barn. Yeah, the cattle would just walk right between the two little ponds there. The pond on the right, that was nothing more than a hog wallow. That was one of our smaller hog pens. And then you can see the barn in the distance, and then we're turning left right now into what used to be the big hog pen. And of course you recognize the lake from the short video from last week. That's the old barn that they'd have barn dances and stuff in. Where that new red building is on the left of the barn, that's where the old blacksmith shop was. The city tore the blacksmith shop down and then built that pole barn, for, I guess, equipment storage or maintenance or whatever. I have no idea. But then that's the old barn that we used to have barn dances in back in the late 30s, early 40s or whatever. I don't even know exactly when they quit the barn dances, but the grandfather had that barn built somewhere in the mid-30s. Now right here beyond the dam of the pond, you can see a bunch of pavilions and buildings over there. That's on the other side of the blacktop, and that's now baseball diamonds, or baseball fields for the local little leagues and things like that. That was our 17-acre hayfield, as a matter of fact, behind the row of houses here on the right-hand side that have all been torn down. That's where I was born and raised, in a little shack right there to the right of where that building is there. And that building actually is built on the corner of what we always call Local Chippo's corner. And of course right here, this little body of water here used to be nothing but the spillway off the pond. Whenever the pond water would get too full, it would just overflow and then head on down this way through the low area and right on down to the little creek that's down below the tree line over here to the left. This little pavilion here, there's a lot of people come out here and get married in the summertime, and this is just a small park area that they've converted our 4.5-acre cornfield into. We used to have this rimmed with a fence, of course, because the cattle would pasture on the outside of this fence and all the way around the creek that pretty much went around the majority of the perimeter of the property. Right here along the right hand side is that little creek I told you circumvented the majority of the property, and on the other side is more pasture. But one of the cool things you're going to see right now is this set of abutments right here. There's one on this side of the creek and of course one on the other side of the creek. And now what that was is there was a little light gauge railroad that actually before turn of the century would actually went from that bluff over there to this side of the road over here, and up on top of the hill there was a cement mill at one time, and they would mine the stone or the rock from over there on the other side of the creek and transport it over here to the cement mill, and of course they produced cement. And of course the small gauge railroad had been disassembled, my gosh, for probably 100 years, about the time, or if not before the time, my grandfather actually ended up with the farm. This particular property itself was a gift from my great-grandfather to my grandfather somewhere around turn of the century. That would have been 1900, late 1800s, early 1900s, thereabouts, because my dad was born in 1909 right here on the property. So I don't really know exactly when my grandfather took possession. But man, I spent many time sloshing around in the creek. Of course, I had to cross the creek a lot of times to get the doggone cows in. Right on up through there, we had a little low water crossing where we'd drive those old tricycle Massey Harris tractors down and across the creek and then up over to the other side. Never really farmed anything over the other side. Oh, a couple of times I think we had barley in there, but most of the time it was just hay, Johnson grass hay or something like that. This is the bottom side of the hog pen. Of course, the hogs were never allowed into this area because it was fenced off, because this was the pasture side for the cattle. Now right down off this bluff is the creek, and you can still see the old fence row right in there, and we're actually driving inside the little the field. I think this was another 4.5 acres or whatever. Sometimes we put corn in here, but most of the time it was barley and wheat. But right off of this is a bluff. It's eroded away quite a lot with the change in the creek. But this is where the few times we would have cattle that would die for whatever reason, you know, we would drag them over here alongside the outside of that fence row, and then we just roll them off that bluff. So down at the bottom of this bluff, if people was to go digging, they'd probably find a good complement of large bones from farm animals and stuff that had been deposited there for, you know, off and on for the last 100 years. And then we'll be coming up again to the picnic ground where we actually started out. I had a special request from a particular viewer called AK Quilter. I believe that stands for Alaskan Quilter, to maybe take a little more footage of the old home property when we had a little bit of snow. And unfortunately we don't have a lot of snow, but at least it's white, and from this angle you're getting a little bit of a different vantage point of the old barn. And of course over here you see all the houses and everything. That's a subdivision on the other side of the railroad tracks that's developed from the farmland that was actually sold over there. So we're just up here, you know, at the end of the lane where the cattle would come out, and then of course in the fence row of all the cedars marking the east edge of the hayfield. This is the west end of the wheat field. And I'd have to search for the little roadway, but there's a roadway that separates this from the hayfield, because we used to have the tool shed and everything down here on this end, and of course up on top of the hill was the chicken house and the old home place house, and then of course the old barn and everything, and then the new old barn that you'll see in just a few minutes, the red one now. And of course that's the bluff over there. The creek runs right pretty close to underneath that bluff that we just looked at. And here's the other railroad that circumvents the western side of the house, of the property. And I'm standing in the backyard of where my grandmother's house used to be, and we had an old maid aunt that stayed home and took care of him. And she kind of somehow or another was dating, I guess, or seeing sometime an old guy that was a conductor on the railroad. And from time to time he would toss her a care package out the window or off the. This will be the west side of the old barn. There's a concrete silo that my dad and his brothers actually mixed and poured by hand. My much older brother still has the actual framework of the bucket the steel framework of the wooden bucket that they used to pull bucket by bucket the hand mixed concrete up to pour those rounds. And you can see the individual rounds on the pour. They had one farm. As they would pour that section, they would elevate the farm, raise it up, and pour another section. And then to the end of the barn right here, you see that circular foundation. That's actually a wooden stave silo that was there for years and years and years. It was just torn down not too awfully long ago, as they kind of halfway renovated the barn, you know, for community activities. And right here alongside of me, this is the old well house right here. We had the old can cooler inside. Of course, it had the well, pump and stuff inside here with a reservoir. That electric is not like it used to be at all. Of course, the city's upgraded that to a certain extent. But then the big garden was to the left of the well house right there. And I'm actually standing in the roadway that went right in front of, right between the old barn, which is behind me, the old silo, which would have been at the north end of the old barn. And of course, off in the distance beyond the barn, you can see the lane with all the cedar trees on the left-hand side. That's the lane I was telling you about. And then, of course, where that gentleman happens to be walking right there, that's right at the outlet of the cow lot. That's right the entrance of the lane. And then, of course, the hog pen would be on the right-hand side at where the pond is. And, of course, this is the northwest corner of the pond. Just a little bit of a skim of ice out there and just a portion of it. And, of course, you got some fresh geese that recently just landed about the time we got here today. There's up close to the old barn. I always thought it was really kind of odd that they've got a welcome sign on the back door. This is the actual back side of the barn. And we had a hog pen right here made out of cemetery fencing, about the second window down. And it came out about 10 or 12 foot or so, and then went all the way to the end of the barn, and then opened up into this area right in front of me. And that was literally the fattening pen. We would feed all the skim milk and stuff to the hogs out there. And to the directly in front of that barn door, all the way down here to about 20 foot from the fence, was always a manure pile that we would build every winter from the dairy cattle staying inside the barn at nighttime between milkings. I'm actually looking through a chain link fence, but here on the south end of the barn right there, that's where we did our butcher. And there's a concrete slab that comes out from the barn about 10 or 12 foot, and the full width of the barn. And that's where every year we would go ahead and butcher our beef right there. We didn't butcher hogs there, but the hogs was over on the other side, you know, up by the old barn, because we had a scalding vat and everything over there, and that huge kettle, about a 48-inch kettle. And that's where we'd cook the head meat and all that stuff, you know. And of course, the smokehouse was on up the hill from there by the old farmhouse. But we killed many a beef right here. So at any rate, like I said, this was as per special request from A.K. Quilter, which, like I said before, I think means Alaskan quilter. And this is just a little bit more of information about the old place. And you know what? Can I get a little shot of the missus? Stay there, stay there. This is Tractor Man 44 and the missus, and we're out of here.